Hello, my name is Yasser. I am from PACademia and today I will be explaining tractology. This is a lecture that's taken in neurosciences in year 3 and in MSK in year 1. Don't worry, the information is the same. However, in MSK, the information was split into 3 lectures. So this is a summary for all 3 lectures. Now let's start off with the basics. The spinal cord begins at the foramen magnum at the level of the skull, and it will extend all the way down to L1, L2. So that's a very important point, that the spinal cord ends at L1, L2. However, in children, it will end at L3. So that's also important. In questions, it comes a lot. Let's move on to how are the nerves coming out. We have 2 nerve roots. We have the dorsal roots and the ventral roots. Now, the dorsal roots are sensory and they have a dorsal root ganglia. Why is this important? Because this ganglion is the nucleus. This is where the cell bodies are found. However, in the motor ventral roots, you will find those cell bodies in the gray matter. This will be further on explained more in details. Now, moving on, we have 3 terminology that are new, which is conus medullaris, cauda equina, and filum terminal. Now, conus medullaris is the tapering end of the spinal cord, so you will find it around the level of L2, L3, while cauda equina is the nerves, let's say L5 and LS1, they have been sent before. Like they will be sent, I'm going to explain them in later on. They have been sent before and they continue down. When they continue down, when they are near the level of the S1, L5, we call them cauda equina. Finally, phylum terminal. Phylum terminal is the dura mater. The dura mater is a covering of the nerves. This covering will continue even more lower until it reaches the level of the coccyx. Okay, so that's all important notes to keep in mind. Now, moving on, we have the cross section. Now, what are we looking at here? We have, as I said, the gray matter. As you can see, it's a bit darker than the surrounding white matter. You will see that the gray matter has one horn and another horn, and it will have a canal in the middle. Then you will also notice we have white matter surrounding it with a stuff like anterior median fissure and posterior median sulcus. There is no need to know these two because they are just for you to understand which one is anterior and which one is posterior. As you can see, the hole is, or the fissure, sorry, is anterior. Now, what do we have? We have also lateral gray horns. In this picture, we can't see it, but they will be here. Now, those are also dark, and they will be found only in the thoracic, so all thoracic T1 to T12, in L1 and L2, and S2 to S4. Why is this important? Because the lateral horn, as I said, the ventral will have motor, the dorsal will have sensory. The lateral horn will have sympathetic, or let's say autonomic nervous system. So the thoracic and lumbar will have sympathetic, while the sacral will have parasympathetic. Why is this important? Because later on in year 2, you will notice that parasympathetic, for example, helps in visceral functions, stuff like urination. So this is all important. If they are damaged, we may have loss of urination. Okay? Now, this is the analogy I said about the pipes and the factory. Gray matter is the factory, while the white matter are the pipes. These are 3 nuclei which we will take later on about their tracts. We have the substantia gelatinosa, which is for temperature and pain. The nucleus proprius, which is for crude touch and pressure. Nucleus dorsalis for unconscious proprioception. I will now talk about the tracts that are associated to these 3 sensory gray horns. Now, before moving on to the tracts, I'm going to talk about the types of cross sections. We just took an example of one. Now I'm going to go into further detail. We have the first one here is the cervical, then thoracic, lumbar, and sacral. I'm going to skip the cervical for now, and I'll start with the thoracic. As you can notice here on the small side, we have the lateral horns. This is important. These are the most important factor of the thoracic. The lumbar is a very large cross section with the gray matter filling up most of it, so that's a very important factor. Finally, the sacral, you will find that it is very similar to the lumbar. The gray matter also fills most of it. However, you can see the gray matter almost makes up 90, or like let's say 85 to 90% of the space. So how do I tell the difference? If I see lateral horns, it's thoracic instantly. If I see a huge amount of gray matter, I will think it's either lumbar or sacral. And how do I tell? Sacral is usually smaller than the lumbar. Finally, the cervical, the important factor in it is this, the posterior median sulcus. As I said, I ignored it at first. you will see at the back, you will find two lines, the posterior median sulcus, and you'll find this line next to it. That's the dorsal intermediate septum. Why is this important? We will discuss it later when we talk about the dorsal column sensory tracts. But keep in mind, those are the two factors. Other factors include it's not really that significant in terms of the gray and white matter, but just look at the back, you will find many divisions. Here you can maybe see a division, but again, if it's a lateral horn, thoracic. Now, disc herniation and vertebral fractures. What do I understand here? Now, let's say there's a C1 nerve. A C1 nerve will exit above the C1 vertebra. C2, same thing. However, when I reach the thoracic level and the lumbar and the sacral, it will exit below it. Why? Because we have C8, there is no C8 vertebra. So C8 exits above T1, which causes all other nerves to exit below it. Now, an important factor and a very common question that comes in almost all Q banks is the vertebra and if they got fractured. Now, what does that mean? As you can see, if I have a cervical vertebra damaged, what is the nerve that is affected? It will be the one like +1 to it. So let's say C4 was affected, that means C5 nerve has been damaged. This is important because it means that we're not talking about if the nerve is exiting below it. We're talking about the nerve being here inside the central canal. Okay. For example, thoracic T10, it will affect L1, L2. So here is T10, as you can see, but L1, L2 are exiting from it. Here, if you can see it, I'm trying not to cover it too much with the pointer, but if you see L1 and you go up, it is related to T10. So if there's a fracture in T10, it will affect it. Understood? This is just more of memorizing, but keep it in mind, if they tell you a fracture, you have to apply it on this table. If they tell you a herniation, just look at which level it is and you can just say, so let's say if it's a herniation at C4, it means C5 has been damaged. However, it means C5 has been damaged. However, if they tell you, for example, T10 has been fractured, L1 and L2, if they tell you there's a hernia at T10, it means nerve T10 has been damaged. Understood? Now, let's talk about some questions. If T12 was fractured, which ones are damaged? And if T12 was herniated, which nerve is damaged? I gave an example about T10. You can go back and apply it. So for example, in this case, if it's a hernia, we're talking about T12. But if it's a hernia, if it's a fracture, we're talking about the L5. Okay. Now, which part of the spinal cord is this? Here, I'll give you some time to answer. Finally, look at the lateral horns. Instantly, thoracic. Last two parts which are important are dermatomes and myotomes. Dermatomes, you just have to study them, you have to memorize them. They are very important for clinical skills. Just learn them by heart. There is no need, and especially learn the nerve roots. Don't worry too much about the abdomen and those stuff. Focus about the upper limb and lower limb. These are the ones that usually come commonly. And myotomes are the same but in relation to muscles. So what does that mean? It means a group of muscles that are innervated by one nerve. Now we go into the details, the bread and butter. We have two types of tracts. We have sensory and motor. So for example, sensory are any tract that takes the sensations from our body, which include pain, temperature, touch, all of that. Motor are the ones that send signals. So that means that we have the motor that originate from the brain, while sensory originate from your periphery or from your skin or from your distal areas like your hands and feet. Okay? We have four types of sensory that we have to know. We have the dorsal column, we have the lateral spinothalamic, we have the anterior spinothalamic, and we have the spinocerebral, which are here usually. The corticospinals are motor. I will talk about them later. Now, quick information. This is color coded for you to understand better. So we have dorsal column. They are direct, so that means they go directly up without crossing. I'm going to talk about that later. Sorry, not without crossing. They cross, but at a higher level. And the word C for conscious proprioception. We're going to talk about the diseases as well, but this is just for you to get a quick information. You can take your time and read it. This image will come back later on, or you can just come back to it whenever you want to have an idea or to remember. I'm going to skip these two because I'll explain them better on a diagram. Spinocerebral, You read the word cerebral, that means the cerebellum. Cerebellum is related to balance. So we have unconscious proprioception. Unconscious proprioception, you may ask what's the difference? Unconscious is when you don't know, or like when you close your eyes. When you close your eyes, you no longer know how you're standing up. This is where the cerebellum comes into play, and this is where the spinocerebellar comes into play. Again, if we have the dorsal spinocerebellar, the word D for direct, which means it will cross later on upwards, while the ventral crosses instantly. I'm going to talk about it right now. Now, here I have two examples. I have the dorsal column and I have the spinothalamic. I'll start with the dorsal column. As you can see here, we have defined touch and proprioception coming in, or as I said, the conscious proprioception. It will go in and it will continue up instantly. It will move up the spinal cord until it reaches the medulla. Until it reaches the medulla. When it reaches the medulla, it will cross to the other side and it will continue up. So where does the dorsal column cross? It crosses in the medulla. So that means that the crossing is up, or you could say it goes up directly and then it crosses. While the spinothalamic, it will enter the spinal cord and it will instantly cross. So that's what I mean by when I say this is direct and this is cross. So this one crosses instantly, this one goes up directly. Okay? After it crosses, it will move up in life until it reaches the brain. Same thing for the dorsal column until it reaches the brain. This is the idea behind all sensory tracts. They will either go up directly or they will cross and then go up. Now, to reach the brain, they will take one of the following steps. This information is for year 3. I'm not sure if year 1s have it. I didn't find it in the slides. For example, for year 3, spinothalamic tracts, when they move up, they're going to move up by the spinal lemniscus. And when they come to reach the brain, they will take the PLVNT, or the posterior blah blah tract. It's just for you to enter the brain. We have the internal capsule for the dorsal column. So when they reach up to the brain, they will take the movement of the internal capsule to reach the brain, to reach the appropriate area. Spinocerebellar will take two different ways because they're not going to the brain, they're going to the cerebellum. So they will take the inferior cerebellar peduncle and the superior cerebellar peduncle. Just you have to memorize them. Usually they don't really ask about them, but just in case, learn them. Now the descending tracts. Descending tracts are the motor tracts. So now we have two types. You remember this picture? This is a detailed picture showing us the sensory and the motor. Now the sensory, the reason I said do you remember is because this is the dorsal column. This is the spinocerebellar tracts. Here you will have the spinothalamic. Here's the anterior and here is the lateral. And then the motor, where are the motor tracts? Here you will have the pyramidal tracts. Here you'll have the lateral corticospinal, which is the main tract, and you'll have the anterior. And then you'll have the pyramidal, they are spread out. Or sorry, the extrapyramidal, they are spread out. Now the pyramidal tract, it starts in the brain. It will move down, moving on all the way until it reaches the medulla, until it reaches the pyramid exactly, and then it will cross. Why is this important? Because you need to understand in our body, the left side is responsible for the right, and the right side is responsible for the left. What does that mean? That means that your left hemisphere of your brain is what controls your right hand, while the right hemisphere of your brain controls your left hand. This applies for your entire body. The only difference is the question will ask you about lesions in specific parts of the spinal cord. So you should keep in mind, did the tract cross or not yet? In all cases, all tracts will cross, but at a certain point. Understood? So here we have the pyramidal tract. It will cross at the pyramid, and then it will continue down until it reaches the anterior horn, as I said, sorry, the anterior horn cells or the motor horn cells that will later on supply the muscles. Now we have cranial nerves. Cranial nerves, you don't need them for year 1. They are the same idea. Again, we start from the brain, we move down, but we will supply the opposite side again. So just as I said, the left hemisphere is responsible for the right side of your body, and the right side is responsible for the left. It just depends on the cross. In this case, your upper motor neuron will not cross. Instead, it will just send small signals to the other side where it will have it. Now let's understand some lesions. We have a tabes dorsalis, which is caused due to infection by syphilis. We will lose the dorsal column. The dorsal column was the sensory area. Poliomyelitis, we will lose the anterior gray horn. The anterior gray horn was the origin of the lower motor neurons, or in other words, it was the motor supply of muscles. Next, we have syringomyelia. Here we have a new word called as anterior commissure. Anterior commissure is the small part in front of the central canal where my lateral spinothalamic crosses to the other side. Lateral spinothalamic, if you remember, we said it crosses instantly. As soon as it enters the spinal cord, it crosses. So if it is damaged, that means that both sides get damaged, because here we're talking about both tracts are crossing to the other side. So here you will have a very specific sign which is called as stock and glove syndrome, where you have loss of sensation in your legs and your hands. It depends on where the, obviously, on where the syringomyelia develops. But this will be bilateral loss of sensation. I have a question about it later. Next up, we have, let's say there was a complete transaction above C4, the person dies. Between C4 to C6, he has quadriplegia, so he loses paralysis in all four limbs. If it's under C8, he gets paraplegia, which means only his lower limbs are paralyzed. Finally, we have the upper and lower motor lesions. We have, you can think of the upper motor neuron as a parent and the lower motor neuron as a toddler. So, and the parent is the person who takes care of the lower motor neuron. He tells him to stop doing something, or prevents him from jumping off, or prevents him from moving excessively. However, the lower motor neuron has a bit of a mind of its own. If there is no inhibitory upper motor, then it can act out as it wishes. Obviously, I don't mean that the upper motor neuron gets an inhibitory signal. In other words, the upper motor neuron more of regulates excessive movement. So let's say it was damaged. Let's say the parent was dead. The toddler in this case will have spastic paralysis. He will move, or the muscle will move so much to the point where you feel like it is rigid. You have increased muscle tone, increased reflexes. As I said, there is no parent to control him. He will just act out, and that will be shown in the other symptoms. However, if the lower motor or if the toddler dies, you have no innervation to your muscle, which means your muscle is practically paralyzed. For example, the case they gave is poliomyelitis. Now, let's understand. Let's see. Clasp knife spasticity results from a lesion in the, which of the following? Clasp knife. So we need to understand, is it an upper motor region or a lower motor region? Clasp knife means it's rigid. The person is rigid. So in this case, the answer is C, the lateral corticospinal. The reason is that's the main upper motor neuron, which supplies all lower motor neurons. Next one, we have number 11. Project to the cerebellum via the inferior cerebral peduncle. If you remember, I said the inferior cerebral peduncle are the spinocerebellar tracts. So we need to look on the picture. If you remember, I said these are the dorsal column. And then I said that we have here two spinocerebral tracts, and then we have the spinothalamic. So the answer in this case will be B. Moving on, question number 23. Bilateral loss of pain and temperature. This is describing syringomyelia. When you have a bilateral loss, that means that the either both spinothalamic tracts are lost, or the place where they cross is lost. In this case, they're saying bilateral. So here we have in A, that is true. In B, it's also true. However, in C and D, it is not true because we don't have it bilaterally. Next part says we have muscle atrophy in both hands. That is true in both cases because we lose the horn cells as well, the gray horn cells. Then we have spastic paresis on the right side only. That's the answer. So look here. Here we have bilateral spastic paresis. Here we have a damage on the left, which means the right will be affected. Now, name the structure highlighted in green, or it's this front part. Is it the ventral median fissure, the anterior horn, or the ventral funiculus? This is the anterior median fissure. The funiculus is the white matter. So that means that the answer is B. Thank you guys so much. Hopefully you benefited from it, and thanks again and good luck.